Welcome back to my channel. And if you are visiting my space for the first time, you are also highly welcome. In this channel, we simplify anatomy, and here we learn anatomy with so much fun. In this lecture, we would be looking at the shoulder girdle. We would be looking at the structural components of the shoulder girdle, highlighting the different types of joints that we have within this space, and also the ligaments that help to reinforce these joints. The shoulder girdle is also referred to as the pectoral girdle because it is seen around the pectoral region, and it is formed by the clavicle and also the scapula. So you have the clavicle located in the anterior region, while we have the scapula located behind. And this is what is projected here in this lower image. So you see that the pectoral girdle is formed by the clavicle placed anteriorly and also the scapula placed posteriorly. And of course, at the lateral part or lateral region of the scapula, we have an indentation that is referred to as the glenoid cavity. It is this glenoid cavity that receives the head of the humerus. And this is what is projected here in this lower image. Going to this upper image, this is where we have the clavicle harrowed in black, which is located in the anterior region. And at the posterior region is where we have the scapula. And at the lateral region of the scapula, we have an indentation that we say is referred to as the glenoid cavity. This is an indentation that is created to receive the head of the humerus. And this is where we have the creation of the shoulder joint that is also referred to as the glenohumeral joint. So if you look at the pattern by which these bones are arranged, forming a structural component of the shoulder girdle, you see that they take an incomplete circular orientation. So they are seen to be arranged in an incomplete ring. And this is what is projected here in this lower image, where you have the clavicle forming the anterior alignment, and behind you have the posterior alignment formed by the scapula. If you look at it, you see that it is an incomplete circular ring, where you have the medial region here opened or exposed, because there is no structural connection created around this region. So this is what the shoulder girdle represents. So let's highlight the functions of the shoulder girdle. This is where we have the scapula at the posterior region, and in the anterior region, we say we have the clavicle. We say these two bones are connected around the shoulder region, where they form the shoulder girdle. Now let's go back to the functions of the shoulder girdle. The shoulder girdle is seen to create joints that help to complete the skeletal framework of the body. If you look at the skeletal alignment of the entire body, you see that at this shoulder region, you have the shoulder girdle helping to complete the skeletal network. And is able to do this because of the connection that it creates in helping to connect the axial skeleton with the appendicular skeleton. If you look at this medial end here of the clavicle, is where we have the clavicle connecting to the sternum. Specifically, it is seen to connect to the manubrum of the sternum. We know that the manubrum of the sternum is the superior region of the sternum, and this is where we have the creation of the sternoclavicular joint. At this point here, you have the clavicle connecting to the axial skeleton, because one of the bones within the axial skeletal system is the sternum. And if you go to this lateral region, this is where it connects with the scapula. Specifically, you see it connecting with the acromion of the scapula. And this is where they form the acromioclavicular joint. If you go to the lateral border of the scapula, we have an indentation that we refer to as the glenoid fossa. Through this fossa, we have the connection of the head of the humerus. And this is where the scapula is connecting with the appendicular skeleton, which is the upper limb. So you see that the shoulder girdle creates a connection network between the axial skeleton and also the appendicular skeleton. And this is that is able to do this. The shoulder girdle also helps to contribute to the wide range of movement that is exhibited by the upper limb. And it does this through the scapulothoracic joint. If you go back to the arrangement of the shoulder girdle, if you look at this medial border here, that is harrowed here in dotted hash, you see that at the medial border of the scapula, there is no structural connection to bone. And this is where it is forming a functional joint that is referred to as a scapulothoracic joint. So at this medial border of the scapula, there is a free will, and this free will is also impacted on the lateral end of the scapula, where it is connecting with the head of the humerus. And this is why it is able to exert a wider range of movement of the upper limb. If you go back to the lower limb, where you have the pelvic girdle, you see that this kind of presentation is not seen around this region. This is why the lower limb executes a lesser range of movement if you compare it to the movement that is exhibited by the upper limb. So you see that a wider range of movement that the upper limb can exert is attributed to the scapulothoracic joint that is formed at the medial border of the scapula. So you see how the shoulder girdle is also helping to contribute to the wide range of movement of the upper limb. This shoulder girdle also creates sites for different muscular attachments. So they create sites for where muscles are attached onto. I've tried to highlight this in a previous lecture on the scapula and also on the clavicle. If you've not checked those lectures out, please kindly go and do so. In those lectures, we highlighted the different muscles that are related to the different sub-regions of this bone. You can also add to this function going through those lectures. So let's drive further to look briefly on the clavicle. Using this image by the side, this is where we have the clavicle. The clavicle is a modified long bone that is horizontally placed. It is also S-shaped in configuration. It is seen to present a doubly curved pattern. We've also tried to highlight this in details in our previous lecture on the clavicle. If you look at it, the way it is positioned, you see that it is horizontally placed, even though it is a long bone. And it is seen to have two ends. It is seen to have a medial end and a lateral end. If you look at this image by the side, this is where we have the medial end of the clavicle, and this is what is harrowed here in green. This medial end of the clavicle can also be referred to as the sternal end, because it is through this end that it connects with the sternum. Specifically, it connects with the manubrium of the sternum, because the manubrium of the sternum is a sub-region of the sternum that is located at the upper region. And since this connection is created at the upper region of the sternum, it will be connecting to the manubrium of the sternum. And if you go to this lateral region here, this is where we have the lateral end of the clavicle. This lateral end of the clavicle can also be referred to as the acromial end, because it is through this end that it connects with the acromion of the scapula. So if you go back to the sternal end, if you drive deep into it, you see that it is larger when you compare it with the lateral end, and it is quadrangular in shape. It is seen to have a facet that helps to connect with the clavicular notch of the manubrium. Remember, we said that the connection of the sternal head is on the manubrium of the sternum, and this is where we have the creation of the sternoclavicular joint. If you go back to the lateral end here, it is flat. This acromial end is also seen with a facet that connects with the acromion of the scapula, and this is where they form the acromioclavicular joint. So you can see that the clavicle forms a joint around its medial end and also another joint around the lateral end, and this is where it is connecting to different bones around that space. So in between the two ends, we have the shaft or the body. So now let's drive to the scapula. The scapula can also be referred to as the shoulder blade. It is triangular in shape and also classified as a flat type of bone. If you look at this image by the side here, this is where we have the scapula harrowed in red. You see that the scapula is located at the posterior lateral region of the trunk. And this is why we say that it contributes to the formation of the shoulder girdle around the posterior region. If you look at the configuration of the scapula, you see that it is seen with projections. You have the coracoid process harrowed in black. The coracoid process is seen like a beak over the glenoid fossa. This is where we have the glenoid fossa or the glenoid cavity, which is an indentation that receives the head of the humerus. So we have a beak-like structure that extends over it, and this is what is referred to as a coracoid process. If you go more posteriorly behind, we have the acromial process. This acromial process is an expanded lateral portion of the spine of the scapula. If you go back to our lecture on the scapula, we said that the posterior region of the scapula is divided into two foci by the spine of the scapula. It is the spine that runs horizontally that divides the posterior region of the scapula into the superior supraspinous fossa and an inferior infraspinous fossa. So if you look at it from behind, you don't have an expanded extension of the spine that is then transformed into the acromion. You see that this acromion from the posterior region is directed forward, and this is where it is invading into the anterior region, where it will be connecting to the acromial end or the lateral end of the clavicle. So this acromion process is what actually creates the connection point or site for the lateral end of the clavicle to form the acromioclavicular joint. We already described this in our previous slide. So this is what the configuration of the scapula looks like. The scapula is also seen to extend from the second to the seventh rib. If you go back to this lower image and you count the number of ribs through which the extension of the scapula runs, you see that it is from the second to the seventh rib. If you go to the lateral region of the scapula, there is a process that is referred to as the acromion. This acromion, we say, creates the connection to the lateral end also for the clavicle. So if you go to the lateral region of the clavicle, where we have the acromial end of the clavicle, you see that this end is connecting to the acromion of the scapula. This is where they form the acromioclavicular joint. And this is created at the lateral region of the scapula. So around the lateral region of the scapula, at this inferior region, you have an indentation that we refer to as the glenoid fossa or the glenoid cavity. This is what we say receives the head of the humerus. So at this point, we have the creation of the glenohumeral joint. So you see that the lateral region of the scapula, we have joints created. And this includes the acromioclavicular joint at the upper region. While in the lower region, we have the glenohumeral joint that is also referred to as the shoulder joint. And this is where we have the head of the humerus fixing into the glenoid cavity or the glenoid fossa at the glenohumeral joint. You see that there is a free wheel around this point. So at this medial border of the scapula, there is no boning connection. So there is a free wheel or allowance created at this point. This is what contributes to the wide range of movement of the upper limb, because this free wheel that is created around this region is also impacted on this lateral region where we have the creation of the glenohumeral joint. So the upper limb can move in a wide range of motion because of the freeness that is created around the medial border of the scapula. So this is how the different bones will come together to form the shoulder girdle. And it is important that we are able to highlight the details. So how these bones also contribute to the effect of the surrounding structures. So in this slide, we will be looking at the joints of the shoulder girdle. Within the shoulder girdle, we have 4 joints created, and these joints are also reinforced by ligaments. We'll also be highlighting the different ligaments that help to reinforce these joints. The first joint that we would be looking at is the sternoclavicular joint. As I've always said on my channel, is for us to always break down the name. If you break down this name, you see that the sternoclavicular joint exists between the sternum and also the clavicle. Going back to this image, this is where we have the sternoclavicular joint. It is a joint that exists between the sternal end of the clavicle and also the manubrum of the sternum. And this is where it is so tagged sternoclavicular joint. This joint is reinforced by a number of ligaments. The first ligament here is the sternoclavicular ligament. Sternoclavicular ligaments are 2. We have its anterior subdivision and its posterior subdivision. This ligament is seen to connect the sternum with the clavicle. You see it connecting the sternal end of the clavicle to the manubrum of the sternum. And this is what is highlighted here in black. So you see strands connecting the sternal end of the clavicle at this region to the manubrum. And this is the anterior subdivision, which means that behind we'll also be having the alignment of this ligament, also helping to reinforce this joint at the posterior region. The second ligament is the interclavicular ligament. The interclavicular ligament, just as the name implies, is located or is connecting the 2 clavicles together. And you see it specifically connecting the sternal ends of the clavicle together. And this is where it is helping to hold in place the 2 clavicles. We also have the costoclavicular ligament. The costoclavicular ligament is seen to connect the clavicle with the costal cartilage and also the rib. So let's use this other side of the image to describe this ligament. This is where we have the costoclavicular ligament here highlighted in red. You see it connecting the clavicle to the first costal cartilage and the first rib at this medial portion. So this is where you see it helping to reinforce the sternoclavicular joint. So these are the ligaments that are seen to help support these joints. The second joint we would be looking at is the acromioclavicular joint. Acromioclavicular joint is a joint, if we break down the name, that exists between the acromion and also the clavicle. And this is what is harrowed there at this lateral region. Remember, this is where we have the acromial end of the clavicle, and we say that this hand will connect to the acromion of the scapula. And this joint is what is created here at this region. So you see this joint existing between the clavicle and also the scapula. But of course, there are distinct and specific regions where this joint will occur. And this is what we've tried to highlight. So we also have a number of ligaments helping to also support this joint. And this includes the acromioclavicular ligament. The acromioclavicular ligament is seen to connect the acromion of the scapula to the acromial end of the clavicle. And this is what is highlighted here in white, just as the name implies. Then we have the coracoclavicular ligament. The coracoclavicular ligament is seen to run from the inferior surface of the lateral 1/3 of the clavicle to the acromion. And this is what is highlighted here in blue. Remember in our previous lecture on the clavicle, we said that the inferior surface of the lateral 1/3 of the clavicle is seen to have the conoid tubercle and also the trapezoid tubercle. These two tubercles are seen to create the insertion point for their corresponding named ligaments. So we have the conoid ligament and also the trapezoid ligament originating from the inferior surface of the lateral 1/3 of the clavicle. And you see them directed inferiorly where they are connected to the coracoid process. These two ligaments is what come together to form the coracoclavicular ligament. So this is why we say that the coracoclavicular ligament that is harrowed here in blue is a complex of two ligaments. And these ligaments include the trapezoid ligament and also the conoid ligament. We tried to describe this in details in our previous lecture on the clavicle. If not check off that lecture, please kindly go and do so. So the next joint that is seen within the shoulder girdle is the glenohumeral joint. Glenohumeral joint is also referred to as the shoulder joint, and it is created between the scapula and also the humerus. If you try to use this image here, this is where we have the glenohumeral joint. This joint is created between the glenoid cavity of the scapula and also the head of the humerus. And this joint is also seen to be supported by a number of ligaments. So we have the transverse humeral ligament. This is what is seen to be highlighted here at this point. This transverse humeral ligament is seen to connect the greater and the lesser tubercles of the humerus together. And if you look at it, you see that this ligament is not connecting one of the bones of this joint to the other. So let's try and explain how it contributes to also supporting this joint, even though this ligament is not seen to be connecting the humerus to the scapula. So you see the transverse humeral ligament connecting the greater tubercle of the humerus to the lesser tubercle of the humerus. And this is what is seen here around this region. This is seen to help cross over the bicipital groove or the intertubercular groove. We have a groove created between these two tubercles that is referred to as the intertubercular groove or the bicipital groove. So with the transverse humeral ligament crossing over the two tubercles, it is seen to help bridge the depression that is created between them. So this is where we say that the transverse humeral ligament is seen to transform this groove into a canal. And within this groove, we have the passage of the long head of the biceps brachii muscle. So we have the long head of the biceps brachii muscle, which is located in the anterior compartment of the arm. You see it's directed within this groove. And this is where it is directed upward and finally inserted or connected to the supraglenoid tubercle. We have a supraglenoid tubercle here just above the glenoid fossa. So because the long head of the biceps brachii muscle is crossing over the shoulder joint, it is helping to support this joint. And also the fact that the transverse humeral ligament is helping to keep or place the long head of the biceps brachii muscle in place due to the fact that it crosses over the greater and the lesser tubercles. It is also helping to contribute to supporting this joint. The second ligament that we have supporting or reinforcing the glenohumeral joint is the coracohumeral ligament. Just from the name, the coracohumeral ligament is connecting the coracoid process to the lesser and the greater tubercle of the humerus. This is where we have the lesser and the greater tubercle of the humerus. So you see this ligament extending to the coracoid process of the scapula. So if you look at the pattern by which this ligament runs, you see that it is crossing over the shoulder joint, and it is also seen to support it because of the parts or the cause that it runs. Then the next ligament that helps to reinforce or support the glenohumeral joint or the shoulder joint is the glenohumeral ligament. This is where we have the glenohumeral ligament here, connecting the joint capsule of the shoulder joint to the head of the humerus. And this is what is highlighted here in red. This glenohumeral ligament is divided into 3 subsets. We have the superior subset, we have the middle subset, and we have the inferior subset. But you see it limited to just the anterior region of the shoulder joint. And this is where it's helping to prevent the anterior displacement of the shoulder joint. Then the next ligament that we have is the coracoacromial ligament. The coracoacromial ligament is seen to connect the coracoid process of the scapula to the acromion of the scapula. And this is what is seen to be highlighted here at this point. And if you look at the pattern by which this ligament runs, you see that it is seen only on the scapula. So it is not seen to be connecting the scapula to the humerus. So now let's dive into establishing how this ligament is listed among the ligaments that are seen to help provide support for the shoulder joint, because it is seen to be located on just the scapula, not seen to be crossing over this joint. If you look at the pattern by which it runs, we say that it connects the coracoid process to the acromion of the scapula. And if you look at it, you see that it's helping to arc over the shoulder joint. And because of this, it is helping to also support at the upper region in placing the head of the humerus within the glenoid fossa of the scapula. So because of the pattern by which it runs at this upper region, creating an arc over the shoulder joint, it is also seen to help contribute to supporting this joint. So this is the ligament here carried at this point. Then the next joint that we have within the shoulder girdle is the scapulothoracic joint. This scapulothoracic joint is more of a functional joint. If you look at this image, this is where we have the scapulothoracic joint. This is what connects the medial border of the scapula to the rib cage at the posterior region. Remember in our previous slide, we tried to highlight that this joint is functional and there is a free will of movement that is created around this region. So there is no structural connection to bone at this point. So you see it existing between the medial border of the scapula and also the thoracic cage. And we classify it more as a physiological joint because of the function that it exerts, and also helping to contribute to the wide range of movement of the upper limb as we have described in our previous slide. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you find this video useful. Please let's continue to stay glued to this channel.